Well, greetings. This is Bill Paige again with the continuation of Men of the Bible. Today, it's a little bit of a different twist. I've never ever spoken on this man before. His name is Pontius Pilate, and his name means one armed with a javelin. If you want to read this about him to a certain degree, you can find it in the book of John, the 18th chapter, the 28th to the 40th verse. He was the Roman governor at the time of Jesus in Judea, and he had been appointed by Caesar. Maybe he thought this was going to be the beginning of bigger and better things. Jesus, of course, we know, is brought in before Pontius Pilate. I'm sure you've heard as the magistrate. The religious leaders have conspired to kill Jesus. They want his life to be taken, but they don't have the authority to take someone's life. They don't have the authority to use capital punishment, though they believe that Jesus' words, his actions are worthy of death. He's claimed to be God because he was. He's chosen to forgive sin because he could, and they didn't like that, and his popularity had grown. And now it says that they conspired to kill him, even though Nicodemus said in John 3, "We know that you're a man that comes from God, for no one can do the things that you do unless God is with them." Nicodemus, one of the big time religious leaders of that time. And so when they bring him before Jesus and they make all of these accusations, Pilate interrogates him and he questions him. And when he finishes questioning him, he comes out and he says, "I find no fault in this man." Jesus acknowledged to him that he was a king. Pilate didn't even object to him making that fact. "So you're a king?" And then Jesus says, "Yes, I am." And then he also said to him, "But everyone that knows the truth, who is of the truth, hears my voice." And Pilate says, "What is truth?" What is truth? That might have been the wrong question. Maybe he would have been better off saying, "Who is truth?" For Jesus had said previously, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." During this particular time is the time of Passover. And there was a Jewish custom that the Roman administrators could release anyone that they chose during the season of Passover. But Pilate wants to let Jesus go. Pilate sees something. Pilate realizes that these guys are just jealous because of him. They're looking at these men who are supposed to be of piety, religious leaders, and they're acting like an unruly mob. He wants to let Jesus go so badly. And so he even asked him, do you want me to let the King of the Jews go? And they demanded that Barabbas be released. And who was Barabbas? Barabbas was a man who had been arrested. He was guilty of robbery and murder. And so in other words, these Jewish men would rather have someone who was a robber and a murderer let go rather than a man who just went about doing good and said some things that they didn't agree with, some things that they felt were blasphemy. And it would have been blasphemy had it not been the truth. I think this. And so he continues to interrogate him, and then all of a sudden he gets a message sent to him from his wife. And here's what she says: "Leave this man alone. She's had a disturbing dream about him." And in her words, "He's a righteous man." Wow. Here he is struggling with his own conscience. I want to let this guy go. These guys just want him to be arrested. They just want him to be killed because they're jealous of him. I don't find any fault in this man. I think he knew Jesus was innocent. And he wanted to let him go, but they continued to badger him. And even the dream that his wife had wasn't enough to deter him to go along with her. Maybe he would have to contend with her later on should he choose to do something. And while we're speaking of his wife, church history says that she took on the name of Claudia later on. And they classified her as a saint way back then because she had given her life to Jesus after his resurrection. But Pilate went against his own conscience. He had the power to release Jesus, but he submitted to the whims of the crowd. And I want to say this. Even if he had let him go, Jesus would have had to die. But he did not have to die at the hands of Pilate. God would have just found a different way. If he chose to let him go, then God would have found another way to allow his son to go to the cross and die and pay the penalty for our sin. But he didn't. Then Pilate comes up with this plan. Okay, maybe within himself, I'll pacify the crowd. I'll have him flogged. And he took Jesus out and had him flogged. Even sometimes flogging could cause someone's death. But that wasn't even good enough. And the Bible says in Isaiah 52 that Jesus was beaten more than any man had ever been beaten, and that his visions were so marred that you could not even tell that he was human. And still the crowd was crying out, "Crucify him." Okay, here's what it says in Matthew 27:24. And when Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, but rather the tumult was rising, he took water and he washed his hands before the multitude. And here's what he says: I am innocent of the blood of this just person. So in other words, I'm innocent of the blood of a man who I feel has done no wrong. Unfortunately, you don't get off that easy. You can wash your hands, but you can't wash your conscience. And God has the final say-so on what's right and what's wrong. And but he chose to wash his hands, and he turned Jesus over to the crowd. And we all know the story. And they took him out and they crucified him. And thanks be to God, 3 days later, he rose from the dead. I think about Pilate. This was his plight. This was the predicament just about of every leader: popularity or integrity, compromise or character. You get put in the middle. That day he chose popularity and compromise by allowing an innocent man to be put to death. And he knew it. And he had to live for it. He was as guilty as the mob that stood before him. The Bible could have been written a different way. And Pilate chose to free Jesus. But the Jewish religious leaders found a different way to have him killed. But we know how it goes. Pilate allowed Jesus to be crucified. Wow. Have you ever been faced with that? Have you ever been given a choice of compromise or character? Has your integrity ever been put on trial? How did you fare? How will we fare the next time? Because it will happen again. Here's a tremendous lesson to be learned here because of our God. And therefore, I think about this sometimes. If Jesus was willing to die for us, are we not willing to live for him? God bless.